The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when Evelyn Carter's alarm clock buzzed softly at 4:30 in the morning. She silenced it with the practiced ease of someone who'd been waking at this hour for 43 years. Her small apartment above the garage was tidy, sparse, and filled with the kind of peace that comes from a life lived with purpose. She dressed slowly, her joints protesting the early hour, and made her way down the exterior staircase toward the main house. The Sterling estate loomed before her, all limestone and glass, perched on 12 acres of manicured lawn that rolled down toward the river. Evelyn had cleaned every inch of this house more times than she could count. She knew which floorboards creaked, which windows stuck in humid weather, and which rooms held the family secrets. She entered through the service entrance, her key turning smoothly in the lock. The kitchen was dark and silent. Evelyn flipped on the lights and began her morning routine, filling the coffee maker, checking the pantry inventory, and pulling out ingredients for breakfast. As the coffee brewed, she hummed an old gospel hymn her mother used to sing, something about walking through the valley and fearing no evil. By 5:30, she was in the grand foyer, polishing the mahogany banister that curved up 3 flights of stairs. Her cloth moved in small circles, steady and methodical. The wood gleamed under her attention, reflecting the crystal chandelier that hung overhead like a frozen waterfall. "Morning, Miss Evelyn," came a soft voice from behind her. Evelyn turned to see Ruth Bennett, a young maid who'd been hired 6 months ago. The girl couldn't have been more than 22, with nervous eyes and hands that never seemed to stop moving. "Morning, baby," Evelyn said warmly. "You're here early." "Couldn't sleep," Ruth admitted, fidgeting with her apron strings. "Mrs. Sterling wants everything perfect for the gala announcement today." Evelyn nodded knowingly. Victoria Sterling's charity galas were legendary, less for the good they did and more for the spectacle they created. Every detail had to be flawless, every surface had to shine, every staff member had to be invisible yet indispensable. Other staff members began arriving as the clock struck 6. Marcus, the groundskeeper, tipped his head respectfully as he passed. The cook, a stern woman named Pauline, squeezed Evelyn's shoulder in silent greeting. There was an understanding among them, a shared acknowledgement that Evelyn was the backbone of this household. She'd been here longer than anyone, had seen 3 generations of Sterlings pass through these halls, and had earned a respect that none of them would say aloud, but all of them felt. At 7 o'clock sharp, the Sterling family descended for breakfast. Victoria Sterling entered first, her silver hair swept into an elegant twist, her silk robe flowing behind her like a cape. At 71, she moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Her face was smooth from expensive procedures, her jewelry tasteful but unmistakably valuable. She settled into her chair at the head of the dining table without acknowledging anyone in the room. Daniel Sterling followed, his tie already loosened despite the early hour. At 45, he had the soft edges of someone who'd never worked hard for anything. His eyes were puffy, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone nursing a hangover. He slumped into his chair and reached immediately for the coffee Evelyn had just poured. Olivia Sterling was last, tapping furiously on her phone as she walked. At 42, she dressed younger than her years, all sleek lines and designer labels. Her skincare company had made headlines 5 years ago, but lately the press had been quieter. She barely looked up as she sat down. Evelyn moved around the table, serving fruit and pastries with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew better than to interrupt. "The gala is in 2 weeks," Victoria announced, spreading jam on her toast with precise strokes. "I've decided to showcase the ruby necklace and the diamond set. They'll be photographed for the catalog, and we'll auction replicas. The originals will be on display." Daniel looked up sharply. "You're putting the real pieces out? Isn't that a security risk?" "Everything will be handled properly," Victoria said coolly. "I'm not concerned." Olivia didn't look up from her phone. "Just make sure the insurance is updated." Victoria's eyes flashed. "The jewelry has been in this family for 4 generations. I'm not concerned about insurance. I'm concerned about presentation." The tension in the room thickened. Evelyn refilled water glasses, her expression neutral, but her ears caught everything. Daniel's gambling debts were an open secret among the staff. Olivia's company was hemorrhaging money, according to the business magazines left scattered in the library. And Victoria cared about nothing more than the sterling name remaining untarnished in society pages. After breakfast, as Evelyn cleared plates, Victoria addressed her directly for the first time that morning. "Evelyn, you'll be responsible for the jewelry during preparations. I want you to personally oversee every time it's moved, photographed, or displayed. You understand how irreplaceable these pieces are." Evelyn met her eyes steadily. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." "Good." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're old enough to know what can't be replaced." The comment hung in the air, a backhanded compliment wrapped in condescension. Evelyn simply nodded and carried the plates toward the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Olivia murmur something to Daniel, and a sharp intake of breath in response. Later that morning, Evelyn found Ruth in the upstairs hallway, tears streaming down her face. A seam in her uniform sleeve had split open, revealing her undershirt. "Mrs. Sterling is going to fire me," Ruth whispered frantically. "She said yesterday that appearance is everything, and now look at me." Evelyn glanced around quickly, then guided Ruth into a nearby linen closet. She pulled a small sewing kit from her apron pocket, the same kit she'd carried for decades. "Hold still, baby," she said gently, threading a needle with practiced speed. As she stitched, Ruth's breathing slowly calmed. "Miss Evelyn, can I tell you something?" "You can tell me anything." Ruth hesitated, then whispered, "Last week, late at night, I saw Mr. Daniel going into Mrs. Sterling's private sitting room, the one where she keeps the jewelry. He was there for a long time, and when he came out, he looked scared." Evelyn's hands didn't falter, but her jaw tightened slightly. "You tell anyone else about this?" "No, ma'am. I didn't want to cause trouble." "Then don't start now," Evelyn said firmly but kindly. "Sometimes seeing things and saying things are two different responsibilities. You understand?" Ruth nodded, relief flooding her face. Evelyn finished the repair, inspecting her work. "There, good as new. Now go on, and remember that fear makes people say foolish things. Don't be one of them." That afternoon, the entire staff was summoned to the main drawing room. Victoria stood near the fireplace, flanked by Daniel and Olivia. On the table beside her sat a velvet-lined case containing the ruby necklace and diamond set. Even in the afternoon light, the jewels seemed to pulse with their own fire. "Everyone will handle these pieces with fear and trembling," Victoria announced dramatically. "They represent not just monetary value, but legacy. Our family's legacy." She gestured toward Evelyn. "Evelyn has been assigned primary responsibility. She will coordinate with the photographer, the insurance appraiser, and the security team. I expect nothing less than perfection." The other staff members exchanged glances. Some looked relieved to be spared the pressure. Others looked at Evelyn with something like pity. The weight of responsibility for something so valuable was no small burden, especially when blame had a way of rolling downhill. As the meeting dispersed, Evelyn's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and saw her grandson's name. Her face transformed, years falling away as she smiled. She stepped out onto the back terrace to take the call. "Andre, baby," she said warmly. "Hey, Grandma." His voice was deep and steady, carrying the confidence of someone who'd fought hard for everything he'd achieved. "Just calling to check on you. How are things?" "Same as always," she said, looking back through the glass doors at the house. "Working hard. I might be able to visit soon," Andre said. "Work's been crazy, but I'm trying to clear some time." Evelyn's heart swelled. "You don't worry about me, baby. You focus on what you need to do. You've made it farther than I ever dreamed." There was a pause, filled with the unspoken love between them. "I made it because of you, Grandma. Everything I am, I owe to you." "You stop that now," she said, her voice thick. "You earned every bit of what you got." They talked for a few more minutes before Andre had to go. As Evelyn ended the call, she noticed Ruth watching from inside, a soft smile on the young woman's face. The following day, Olivia requested Evelyn's presence in Victoria's private sitting room. The jewelry case sat open on the desk, and Olivia held a small magnifying glass, examining each piece with intense focus. The clasp on the ruby necklace, Olivia said without looking up. It's worn. See here. She pointed to a tiny area where the gold had thinned slightly. Evelyn leaned in, studying the spot. That's normal wear, Miss Olivia. Those pieces are nearly 100 years old. Still, Olivia made a note in a leather-bound journal. We should document everything. Every imperfection, every detail. Her eyes lingered on Evelyn for a beat too long. You understand why, don't you? For insurance purposes. The implication wasn't subtle. Evelyn kept her expression neutral. Of course, ma'am. As Olivia continued her inspection, Evelyn felt the first stirrings of unease. The scrutiny, the documentation, the careful recording of every flaw, it felt less like preparation and more like building a case. That evening, Daniel found Evelyn in the library, where she was dusting the upper shelves. Evelyn, he said casually, hands in his pockets. Quick question. The security system in this house, how does it work exactly? She climbed down from the step stool, studying him. His eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled faintly of scotch. I'm not sure I follow, Mr. Daniel. Just curious. You know, with the gala coming up and all the valuable items around. Are there cameras in every room? Motion sensors? How are the safes accessed? The questions were too specific, too pointed. Evelyn chose her words carefully. I imagine Mrs. Sterling has all that information. Security isn't really my area. Right. He laughed awkwardly. I'm just thinking about renovations. Might need to adjust some things. He left quickly, and Evelyn stood in the empty library, worry settling heavy in her chest. She'd watched Daniel grow up, had seen him spiral into addiction and debt more than once. She recognized the desperation in his eyes. But speaking up would mean accusations without proof, and in this house, her word meant nothing against his. 3 days later, the storm arrived. It rolled in just after dinner, dark clouds swallowing the twilight. Rain began as a whisper and built to a roar within minutes. Wind rattled the old windows, and thunder cracked so loudly it shook the walls. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied. But the security system beeped repeatedly, alarms chirping as sensors reset. Staff scrambled to protect the furniture near leaky windows. Evelyn rushed upstairs with towels, pressing them against the sills in the east wing, where water always found a way inside. The house was chaos, people shouting, footsteps pounding, the storm outside, trying to claw its way in. In the confusion, Evelyn passed Victoria's sitting room. The door was closed, but through the crack at the bottom, she saw the light was on. A shadow moved across that sliver of light, quick and furtive. She paused, hand on the doorknob, then heard Victoria calling for her from down the hall. By the time she checked on Mrs. Sterling and returned, the light in the sitting room was off. Hours later, the storm passed, leaving behind the clean smell of rain and the scattered debris of broken branches. The house settled back into its usual rhythms. Staff finished their duties and retired for the night. Evelyn was the last to leave, as always, making one final round to ensure everything was secure. She was halfway to her apartment when she heard the scream. It was Victoria, her voice shrill with panic, echoing through the halls. Evelyn ran back inside, her heart pounding. Other staff members appeared from their quarters, all converging on the main house. Victoria stood in her sitting room, her hand pressed to her chest, her face white. The jewelry case sat open and empty on the desk. They're gone, she whispered. The ruby necklace, the diamond set, all of it, gone. The room erupted. Staff members crowded the doorway, voices overlapping in shock and confusion. Daniel appeared in his robe, Olivia close behind, both looking appropriately horrified. Victoria's eyes swept the room, wild and accusing, until they landed on Evelyn. "You," she said, her voice dropping to something cold and sharp. "You were the last person I saw near this room." The air left Evelyn's lungs. Every eye turned toward her. "Mrs. Sterling, I didn't." "Security," Victoria barked. "Lock down the estate. No one leaves. Call the police immediately." The rain started again outside, softer now, but relentless. Evelyn stood frozen, surrounded by faces that had once shown her respect but now looked at her with suspicion. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The truth was somewhere in this house, buried under lies and desperation. But truth had never been enough to protect someone like her. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Police cruisers lined the circular driveway, their lights flashing silently against the pale stone of the Sterling estate. Inside, the house had transformed into something foreign. Yellow tape blocked Victoria's sitting room. Officers moved through hallways, taking photographs and dusting for fingerprints. The staff had been confined to the kitchen, waiting to be interviewed one by one. Evelyn sat at the far end of the long kitchen table, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't slept. Her uniform was wrinkled from the night before, and her eyes burned with exhaustion. Around her, the other staff members whispered in tight clusters. Some shot her sympathetic glances. Others looked away entirely. Ruth sat beside her, loyal but terrified. "Miss Evelyn, they can't really think." "Hush now," Evelyn said quietly. "Save your words for when they matter." A young officer appeared in the doorway. "Evelyn Carter?" She rose slowly, her knees protesting. Ruth grabbed her hand and squeezed it once before letting go. Evelyn followed the officer down the hall to the library, where they'd set up a makeshift interrogation room. Detective Marcus Harris sat behind the desk, a middle-aged black man with kind eyes and a tired expression. He gestured for her to sit. "Miss Carter, I'm Detective Harris. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions." "I understand," Evelyn said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Can you walk me through your movements yesterday evening?" She recounted her routine in careful detail, checking the windows during the storm, responding to Victoria's calls, making her final rounds. Her voice never wavered, but her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Harris took notes, nodding occasionally. "And you didn't enter Mrs. Sterling's sitting room at any point?" "I walked past it. The door was closed, but I saw a light underneath. I heard Mrs. Sterling calling me, so I went to her first. When I came back, the light was off." "Did you see anyone else near that room?" Evelyn hesitated. She thought of Daniel's shadow, of his desperate questions about security, of Ruth's whispered confession about seeing him there before. But she also knew what happened to people who made accusations without proof. "The house was chaos during the storm," she said carefully. "Everyone was moving around." Harris studied her for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes, regret, maybe or recognition. He knew how these situations played out. He knew who would be blamed regardless of evidence. "Miss Carter, I want you to know that I don't want to be here for this." She nodded once. "But you are." One by one, the other staff members were interviewed. Pauline, the cook, defended Evelyn fiercely, saying she'd never taken so much as a dinner roll home in 43 years. Marcus, the groundskeeper, vouched for her character, but admitted he'd been outside during the storm and hadn't seen anything. Ruth's interview was brief. She was so nervous she could barely speak, answering in monosyllables and staring at her hands. When asked if she'd seen anything unusual, she opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head. The officer dismissed her impatiently. Then Daniel was called in. He dressed carefully for his interview, wearing a pressed shirt and tie, his hair slicked back. He sat down with an air of cooperation, hands clasped on the desk. "Mr. Sterling, can you describe your movements during the storm?" "I was in my room initially," Daniel said. "The power flickering made me nervous, so I came downstairs to check on my mother. That's when I saw Evelyn." Harris looked up. "Where did you see her?" "Near the hallway by my mother's sitting room. She was hovering near the door, lingering. It struck me as odd, because there was no reason for her to be there. Mother was calling for her from the other direction." Harris scribbled notes. "What time was this?" "Around 8:30, I think, during the worst of the storm." Daniel's voice was steady, practiced, but his hand moved to his forehead, wiping away sweat that hadn't appeared. His throat worked as he swallowed hard. "Did you see her enter the room?" "I didn't see her go in, no, but she was there, alone, when no one else was around." The interview continued, but the damage was done. Daniel's testimony was convenient, tidy, and pointed directly at Evelyn. Later, Olivia was interviewed in the drawing room, surrounded by her spreadsheets and documentation. "I've been keeping detailed records," she explained, sliding a folder across the desk. "Access logs, timestamps, inventory checks." Evelyn had the most unsupervised time with the jewelry. "It's all here." The officer flipped through the pages, impressed by her thoroughness. "This is very helpful, Ms. Sterling." Olivia's hands shook slightly as she pulled them back in her lap. "I just want to make sure we have all the facts. For insurance purposes." What the logs didn't show were the times Daniel had been present. What they didn't capture were the late-night visits or the desperate phone calls. Olivia had constructed a narrative through omission, through the careful selection of which truths to tell. That afternoon, Detective Harris returned to the kitchen where Evelyn waited. "Ms. Carter, we found something in your cleaning card." Her heart stopped. "What?" He held up a clear evidence bag containing a small velvet pouch, the same deep red as the case that had held the jewelry. It was empty, but unmistakably from the Sterling collection. "This was in the bottom of your card, under cleaning supplies." Evelyn stared at it, her mind racing. She'd never seen it before. Someone had planted it there, hidden it where it would be found during a search. "I don't know how that got there," she whispered. "I swear to you, I have never stolen anything from this family." Harris's expression was pained. "I want to believe you, Miss Carter, but I have evidence, I have testimony, and I have pressure from one of the wealthiest families in the state. My hands are tied." Evelyn's legs gave out. She dropped to her knees on the kitchen floor, her voice breaking. "Lord, how they twist the truth. How they take a lifetime of service and turn it into suspicion." Ruth rushed to her side, helping her up, both of them crying now. By evening, the Sterling family had already moved to damage control. Victoria hired a crisis PR firm that went to work immediately, crafting statements and managing the narrative. By the time the local news aired, the story had already leaked. Whispers of corruption among long-term staff, questions about oversight and trust in wealthy households. The Sterling estate losing control? One headline read. Another, trusted housekeeper accused of stealing priceless jewelry. Evelyn's face wasn't shown, but her name was everywhere. 43 years of loyalty reduced to a footnote in someone else's scandal. That night, Evelyn's phone rang. It was Andre again. "Grandma, I'm catching a flight. I'll be there tomorrow." "No." Her voice was sharp. "You stay where you are. You have worked too hard to get tangled up in this mess." "Grandma, I mean it, Andre. Your name can't be connected to mine right now. I won't let them ruin you too." She hung up before he could argue. Then she deleted the voicemail he'd left earlier, erasing any evidence that he'd offered to help. If they came for her, she wouldn't let them touch him. Later that night, Ruth couldn't sleep. She wandered the darkened house, her thoughts churning. She ended up near the closed door of Daniel's study and heard his voice, angry and desperate, on the phone. "I told you, I'm working on it. I'll have the money by Friday. No, listen to me. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I was going to put everything back after." Ruth's hand flew to her mouth. She stepped back, her heart hammering. She wanted to burst through the door, to scream at him, to make him confess. But fear paralyzed her. If she spoke up, what would happen to her? She was nobody, just another faceless maid. Who would believe her over a Sterling? She hurried back to her quarters, shaking, and lay awake until dawn. The next morning, a courier arrived with official documents. Evelyn was formally charged with grand theft. The legal paperwork was dense and terrifying, filled with language she barely understood. The bail amount was set so high she couldn't begin to consider paying it. When she walked out of the estate that day, carrying a small box of her personal belongings, the other staff members watched from windows. Some waved. Others turned away. Pauline stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Evelyn held her head high as she walked down the long driveway toward the gate. Her shoulders were back, her stride steady. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. That night, alone in a hotel room paid for by a church fund, Evelyn returned to the Sterling estate one last time in her mind. She thought of Victoria's sitting room, of the empty jewelry case, of the life she'd built within those walls. She whispered to the darkness, to God, to anyone who might hear, "I raised your children better than this." The words hung in the silence, an indictment and a prayer all at once. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters by 8 in the morning. Cameras jostled for position, microphones thrust toward anyone who looked remotely connected to the case. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like flowers seeking sun. The Sterling case had become a spectacle, the kind of story that fed the 24-hour news cycle with all its favorite ingredients: wealth, scandal, and the fall of someone trusted. Evelyn arrived in a borrowed sedan driven by her pastor, Reverend Matthews. She wore her Sunday best, a navy dress with pearl buttons that she'd owned for 15 years. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her hands clutched a worn Bible. As she stepped out of the car, the cameras surged forward. "Ms. Carter, did you steal the jewelry? How does it feel to be accused by the family you serve? Do you have anything to say?" She walked through the crowd without speaking, her eyes fixed straight ahead. The pastor walked beside her, one hand on her elbow, guiding her through the chaos. Behind them, she heard whispers from other onlookers, people who'd come just to watch the show. "She doesn't look like a thief," one woman murmured. "They never do," another replied. Inside, the courtroom was old and imposing, all dark wood and high ceilings. The gallery was already filling with spectators, journalists, and courthouse regulars who treated trials like theater. Evelyn sat at the defense table beside her court-appointed attorney, a young woman named Sarah Chun who looked barely out of law school. Sarah had kind eyes but tired shoulders, the look of someone drowning in too many cases and not enough resources. "Remember what we discussed," Sarah whispered. "Answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. And try to stay calm." Evelyn nodded, though calm felt like something that belonged to another lifetime. The prosecution table sat across the aisle, occupied by Gregory Walsh, a silver-haired attorney known for representing wealthy families. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Evelyn made in 6 months. He arranged his papers with meticulous care, never once glancing in her direction. The gallery doors opened, and the Sterling family entered. Victoria wore black, dramatic and severe, like she was attending a funeral for her own trust. Olivia followed in cream and gold, her expression carefully neutral. Daniel brought up the rear, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes scanning the room nervously. They took their seats in the front row, and Evelyn felt their presence like a weight on her chest. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Richard Abrams entered, a man in his early 60s with gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He'd built a reputation for fairness, but also for following the letter of the law without sentimentality. He settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom with the air of someone who'd seen every kind of human drama and had stopped being surprised by any of it. "Be seated," he said. "We'll begin with opening statements." Gregory Walsh stood, buttoning his jacket. He approached the jury box with the confidence of someone who'd already won. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "this is a case about trust betrayed. For 43 years, Evelyn Carter was welcomed into the Sterling home. She was given access to the most private spaces, the most valuable possessions. She was trusted." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. The Sterling family believed that trust was mutual. They believed that someone who'd been with them for so long, who'd been treated like family, would honor that relationship. But on the night of the storm, that trust was violated. Mrs. Victoria Sterling's priceless jewelry, heirlooms passed down through 4 generations, disappeared. And the evidence, ladies and gentlemen, points to one person. The person who had access. The person who had opportunity. The person who was seen near the scene of the crime. He turned, gesturing toward Evelyn. "The defendant may have had a long history with this family, but sometimes the people we trust most are the ones positioned to hurt us worst. The prosecution will prove that Evelyn Carter, motivated by opportunity and temptation, stole jewelry worth over $3 million from the family she claimed to serve." He sat down, and murmurs rippled through the gallery. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, her face showing nothing. Sarah stood for the defense, and Evelyn could see her nervousness in the way she gripped her notepad. "Members of the jury, The prosecution wants you to believe that a woman who dedicated her entire adult life to one family would suddenly, after 43 years of spotless service, commit a crime. They want you to believe this without direct evidence, without witnesses, without anything more than circumstance and assumption. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. Evelyn Carter has never taken so much as a spoon from that house. She has no criminal record, no history of theft, no motive beyond their speculation. What the prosecution is really asking you to believe is that opportunity equals guilt, that access equals crime. And that's not justice. That's prejudice dressed up as evidence. She sat down, and the courtroom fell silent. Judge Abrams made a note, then looked up. The prosecution may call its first witness. Victoria Sterling took the stand with theatrical precision. She wore her grief like a costume, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief before she even began speaking. The bailiff swore her in, and Gregory Walsh approached with the gentleness of someone handling precious china. "Mrs. Sterling, can you describe the jewelry that was stolen?" Victoria's voice trembled. "The ruby necklace belonged to my great-grandmother. It was worn at her wedding in 1921. The diamond set, earrings, bracelet, and ring were given to my mother by my father on their 25th anniversary. These aren't just valuable objects, Mr. Walsh. They're my family's history. They're irreplaceable." She pressed the handkerchief to her eyes again. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see that empty case. I see 40 years of trust shattered in one night. And who had primary responsibility for these items in the days leading up to the theft? Evelyn Carter. I assigned her personally because I thought," her voice broke convincingly, "I thought she was someone I could trust." The jury watched Victoria with obvious sympathy. Several members nodded along with her testimony. Evelyn stared at her hands, her jaw tight. On cross-examination, Sarah tried to poke holes in the emotion. "Mrs. Sterling, these items were insured, weren't they?" "Yes, but that's not the point." "For how much?" "Victoria hesitative." "For $1 million. So if they're never recovered, you'll actually profit from this theft." "Objection," Walsh called out. "Relevance." "Sustained," Judge Abrams said, but the jury had heard it. A seed of doubt had been planted. Olivia was called next. She brought her spreadsheets and access logs, laying them out with corporate efficiency. Gregory Walsh walked her through each document, highlighting timestamps that showed Evelyn's movements throughout the house. According to these logs, Walsh said, Ms. Carter accessed the sitting room area 17 times in the 3 days before the theft, more than any other staff member. "That's correct," Olivia said. She had the most unsupervised access to that area of the house. Sarah's cross-examination was brief but pointed. "Ms. Sterling, these logs also show your brother Daniel in that area multiple times, correct?" Olivia's hands tightened on the spreadsheet. "Yes, but he lives there. He has a right to be anywhere in the house." "And do these logs track when people leave areas, or just when they enter?" "Just entries. So if someone stayed in that room for hours, your logs wouldn't show that." "No, but—" "Thank you, Miss Sterling." Olivia left the stand with her composure cracked, her hands shaking as she gathered her papers. Then Daniel was called. He walked to the stand with false confidence, the kind that evaporates under scrutiny. He swore his oath and sat down, tugging at his collar. "Mr. Sterling," Walsh began, "can you describe what you saw on the night of the theft?" Daniel cleared his throat. "It was during the storm. I came downstairs to check on my mother because the power was flickering. That's when I saw Evelyn near my mother's sitting room. She was alone, standing by the door. When she saw me, she looked startled, guilty even." "Did you see her enter the room?" "I didn't see her go in, but she was right there. And later, when I went past that hallway again, I saw her coming from that direction. She had something small in her hand, something she slipped into her pocket quickly when she noticed me." Evelyn's head snapped up. That was a lie, a complete fabrication. Sarah scribbled notes furiously. On cross-examination, Sarah approached Daniel with careful precision. "Mr. Sterling, you said you saw Ms. Carter near your mother's sitting room during the storm. What time was this exactly?" "Around 8:30, I think." "You think?" "Well, you know, it was around that time. And You said you were checking on your mother. Where was she? In her bedroom, which is on the opposite side of the house from the sitting room. Daniel shifted. Yes, but I was walking through. So, you took the long way to check on your mother during a storm, rather than going directly to her room? I was checking the whole house. Sarah pulled out a document. Mr. Sterling, isn't it true that you have significant gambling debts? That you owe approximately $200,000 to various casinos and private lenders? Daniel's face went red. That's not relevant. Isn't it also true that you were seen at a pawn shop 3 weeks before the theft, attempting to sell a watch that belonged to your father? Objection. Walsh jumped to his feet. This is harassment of the witness. Judge Abrams studied Sarah carefully. Where is this going, counselor? Your Honor, I'm establishing that Mr. Sterling had both motive and opportunity to commit this theft himself. I'll allow it, the judge said slowly. But tread carefully. Sarah continued. Mr. Sterling, can you tell us the exact date and time you saw Ms. Carter by the sitting room? Daniel stumbled. Already said, around 8:30. On what date? The night of the storm. The 23rd. Sarah held up another document. The storm occurred on the 22nd, Mr. Sterling. Not the 23rd. You've misremembered the date. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Daniel wiped his forehead, his confidence crumbling. I meant the 22nd. I misspoke. Or you're misremembering because you weren't really there. Or because you're lying. Objection. Withdrawn. Sarah returned to her seat, and Daniel left the stand looking like he'd been through a war. During the lunch recess, the courthouse buzzed with speculation. Journalists filed updates from the steps. Observers debated in the hallways. And in a quiet corner of the courthouse cafeteria, Ruth sat alone, clutching the small notebook she'd brought from home. Inside were her notes about Daniel's phone call, the conversation she'd overheard about owing money and not meaning for things to go this far. She stared at the notebook, her heart racing. She knew what it contained could change everything. But fear held her silent. Fear of losing her job, fear of being disbelieved, fear of the Sterling family's power. When court resumed, Evelyn was called to the stand. The walk felt endless, like crossing a desert. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, then sat down and faced the courtroom. Sarah guided her through her testimony gently. Evelyn spoke of her 43 years with the Sterling family, of watching Daniel and Olivia grow from children to adults, of the countless hours she'd spent caring for that house and everyone in it. I washed their tears, Evelyn said softly. I cleaned their messes. I held their secrets. And I never asked for anything but fair wages and respect. I didn't take those jewels. I wouldn't. Not because I couldn't, but because it goes against everything I believe in. Her voice was steady, dignified, and utterly sincere. Several jurors leaned forward, visibly moved. Even Judge Abrams watched her with something like respect. When Gregory Walsh cross-examined her, he tried to shake her composure, but Evelyn remained unflappable. She answered every question with calm precision, never raising her voice, never losing her temper. By the time she stepped down, the courtroom was silent. Journalists were already typing furiously on their phones. Outside, the case became a national conversation. Hashtags trended on social media, some supporting Evelyn, others condemning her. A clip of her testimony went viral, particularly the moment when she said, "I washed their tears." Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 5 million times. The public was divided, passionate, and loud. Some saw a woman wrongly accused because of her race and class. Others saw a cautionary tale about trusting employees too much. The Sterling case had become a mirror reflecting society's deepest divides. Inside the courtroom, Judge Abrams reviewed his notes with a troubled expression. Something about this case felt wrong to him. Procedurally, morally, fundamentally wrong. The evidence was thin, the motivations murky, and the accuser's credibility increasingly questionable. But the law required proof, not instinct. He could sense right beneath the surface, but he needed someone to expose it before he could intervene. As the day ended and the gallery emptied, a tall man in a dark suit entered through the rear doors. He moved quietly, choosing a seat in the very back row where shadows gathered. His face was angular and serious, his eyes sharp and observant. He pulled out a notepad and began writing, documenting every word, every gesture, every inconsistency. Evelyn saw him as she was led out by the bailiff. Just for a moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. Hers filled with tears she refused to let fall. His jaw clenched with barely controlled anger. Andre Carter had arrived, and though no one else knew who he was yet, the balance of power had just shifted. The next morning, Andre Carter sat in the same back row seat, a notebook open on his lap, his eyes tracking every movement in the courtroom. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing case files, news reports, and public records. What he'd found enraged him, not just the accusations against his grandmother, but the sloppy investigation, the circumstantial evidence presented as fact, and the clear bias running through every aspect of the prosecution. He'd wanted to storm the courtroom, to announce himself immediately, to use every ounce of his authority to shut this circus down. But his grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. Don't risk your future for my past. So he watched, documented, and waited for the right moment. Victoria Sterling sat in the gallery, flanked by her children, but her posture had changed. She was rigid now, her theatrical grief replaced by something harder. She kept glancing at the back of the courtroom, as if sensing she was being watched by someone who mattered. The prosecution called Detective Harris to the stand. He testified about the investigation, walking the jury through the timeline of the theft, the discovery of the velvet pouch in Evelyn's cart, and the interviews with staff members. On cross-examination, Sarah pressed him on the details. Detective Harris, you said the velvet pouch was found in Ms. Carter's cleaning cart, with her fingerprints on it. Harris shifted uncomfortably. No, it was clean. Clean? So someone handled this pouch carefully enough to leave no prints, but carelessly enough to leave it in a cart that's inspected regularly. It's possible they wiped it down, or possible someone planted it there. Sarah let that hang. Detective, how many other staff members had access to that cart? Several, but so anyone could have placed that pouch there to frame Ms. Carter? Objection, Walsh called. Speculation. Sustained. But the jury had heard it. Doubt was spreading like cracks in ice. During the lunch recess, Andre made his move. He waited until Evelyn left the courtroom with her attorney, then followed at a distance. He found her in a small conference room, sitting alone while Sarah made phone calls in the hallway. Grandma, he said quietly, closing the door behind him. Evelyn's head snapped up. Andre, what are you doing here? I told you. I know what you told me. He pulled a chair close and took her hands. But I can't sit in Washington pretending this isn't happening. I can't let them destroy you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Baby, you've worked so hard. You're the Attorney General. If people know you're my grandson, they'll use it against you. They'll say you're compromised, biased. Let them say it. His voice was fierce. Grandma, I am who I am because of you. Every degree, every achievement, every step forward, it all came from the foundation you built. You sacrificed everything to raise me. You work yourself to the bone to pay for my books, my clothes, my future. And now they want to take your dignity, your freedom? I won't allow it. Andre, my future came from your past, he said, his voice breaking. So don't ask me to choose between them. They're the same thing. Evelyn collapsed into his embrace, her strength finally faltering. For the first time since the accusation, she let herself cry. Andre held her, his own tears falling silently into her hair. Around them, the courthouse bustled with noise, but in that small room, there was only the two of them and the weight of everything they'd survived together. Outside in the hallway, Detective Harris stood by the water fountain, lost in thought. A man approached him, tall, well-dressed, familiar but unplaceable. Detective Harris? Andre said, not yet revealing his identity. Yes, I've been watching this trial. Something about it doesn't sit right with you, does it? Harris studied him carefully. Who are you? Someone who cares about the truth. Andre pulled out the police report. This velvet pouch that was found. No fingerprints at all. In 43 years, Evelyn Carter never had a single complaint filed against her. And yet somehow, on the night of the theft, she supposedly gets careless enough to leave evidence in her own cart. Harris frowned. I had the same questions. Then why isn't anyone asking them officially? Because the Sterling family carries weight in this city. When people like them want answers, the department delivers. Andre's expression hardened. What if I told you there are security camera gaps around the time of the theft? That someone disabled motion logs near that sitting room? Harris's eyes widened. How do you know that? Because I made some calls. And I think if you look closely at Daniel Sterling's timeline, you'll find he had opportunity no one's talking about. Who are you? Harris asked again, more insistent. Andre handed him a card. Someone who's going to pursue the truth, with or without official channels. He walked away, leaving Harris staring at the card in his hand, realization slowly dawning. Back in the courtroom, tensions between Olivia and Daniel reached a breaking point. During a recess, they stood in a side hallway, their voices rising despite their attempts at discretion. This is your fault, Olivia hissed. If you hadn't been so desperate, so reckless. Shut up, Daniel snapped. You think I wanted this? You think I planned for Evelyn to take the fall? Then who did you plan to blame? Me? I was going to put it back. I just needed a few weeks to pay off what I owed, and then everything would have gone back to normal. Olivia stared at him, horror dawning. So you did take them? Daniel grabbed her arm. Keep your voice down. Don't touch me. She yanked free. I'm not going down for this. Do you understand me? I will not let your addictions destroy what's left of this family. She stormed off, leaving Daniel trembling against the wall. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called someone, his voice desperate and low. I need more time. Things are falling apart here. No, I can't. Please, just give me until the end of the month. He didn't see Ruth standing just around the corner, her notebook clutched to her chest, listening to every word. This time, she didn't freeze. This time, something inside her hardened into resolve. That afternoon, Ruth approached Andre in the courthouse lobby. She'd seen him with Evelyn, had put together enough to know he mattered. Excuse me, sir. Andre turned, noting her sterling household uniform. Yes. My name is Ruth Bennett. I worked with Ms. Evelyn. Can I speak with you privately? They found an empty witness room. Ruth's hands shook as she opened her notebook. I heard something, she whispered. The night before the jewelry was discovered missing, I heard Mr. Daniel on the phone. He was talking about owing money, about how things weren't supposed to go this far. And just now I heard him again. He admitted to his sister that he took the jewelry. He said he was going to put it back. Andre read her notes carefully, his expression controlled, but his eyes blazing. Why didn't you come forward before? Ruth's voice broke. I was scared. I am nobody. Just a maid. Who would believe me over them? Andre knelt down, so they were eye level. You're not nobody. You're brave. And what you've done, coming forward now, it matters. It could change everything. Will you help Ms. Evelyn? I'm going to try. He stood, his mind already racing through legal strategies. But I need you to be willing to testify. Can you do that? Ruth nodded, tears streaming down her face. She was kind to me when no one else was. She deserves better than this. Andre pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. So do you? That evening, Andre requested a private meeting with Judge Abrams. The judge's clerk was reluctant until Andre presented his credentials. The clerk's face went white when he saw the Attorney General's seal. In chambers, Judge Abrams stood when Andre entered. Attorney General Carter. This is unexpected. Your Honor, I need to disclose something. Evelyn Carter is my grandmother. Abrams sat down slowly, processing this information. I see. And you're here, too? To ensure justice is served. Not to interfere, but to present evidence that's been overlooked or ignored. Evidence that suggests the real thief is still free while my grandmother sits accused. Why aren't you on her defense team? Andre's smile was bitter. Because she didn't want me to be. She was trying to protect my career. But necessity has outweighed her wishes. Abrams studied him for a long moment. I felt something off about this case from the beginning. The evidence is weak, the accusation's convenient. But I'm bound by what's presented in court. What if I told you I have a witness who overheard Daniel Sterling confess? What if I told you there are security gaps that weren't investigated? What if I showed you financial records proving Daniel's desperation? Then I'd tell you to bring it to court in a way I can't ignore. Abrams leaned forward. Attorney General, I want justice as much as you do, but I need you to work within the system, not around it. I understand, Your Honor. Good, because if you bring me something substantial, I'll make sure this jury hears it. Andre left chambers with renewed determination. He spent the night making calls, pulling records, and building a case that couldn't be dismissed or buried. By morning, he had what he needed, not just suspicions, but proof. When court resumed, the atmosphere had shifted. Reporters lined up earlier, sensing something was about to break. Security was tighter. Courthouse staff whispered urgently in hallways. Victoria Sterling sat with her lawyer, her expression betraying anxiety for the first time. Before closing arguments could begin, Andre stood from his seat in the back row. His voice cut through the murmurs clearly and authoritatively. Your Honor, I request leave to address this court. Every head turned. Judge Abrams looked at Andre with careful neutrality. On what grounds? Andre walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent room. I am Andre Carter, Attorney General of this state, and the accused is my grandmother. The courtroom exploded. Cameras flashed despite the rules. Journalists scrambled for their phones. Victoria's face went white. Daniel looked like he might vomit. Olivia's mouth fell open in shock. Evelyn closed her eyes, a mix of pride and fear washing over her face. Order. Judge Abrams banged his gavel repeatedly. I will have order in this court. The noise died down slowly. Every eye was on Andre now, standing tall, composed, radiating the authority of someone who'd earned his position through merit and determination. Victoria's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, this represents a clear conflict of interest. Attorney General Carter should recuse himself from any involvement in this case. I'm not here as the prosecution or the defense, Andre said calmly. I'm here as a citizen who has uncovered evidence relevant to this case. Evidence that suggests justice has not been served and the wrong person stands accused. Judge Abrams considered carefully. I'll allow you limited participation as an advisor to the defense, not as primary counsel. You may present your evidence, but you will not argue on behalf of the defendant. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, Your Honor. Andre turned to face the gallery, his gaze sweeping over the Sterling family. Victoria looked away. Daniel couldn't meet his eyes. Only Olivia held his stare, guilt and shame written across her face. The truth, Andre said quietly, is about to come out, whether people are ready for it or not. The judge called for a recess to review the new development. And as the courtroom emptied, one thing was certain. The trial had just changed completely. The accused grandmother had an ally now, and he carried the full weight of the law behind him. The storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived. The revelation that Andre Carter was the Attorney General sent shockwaves that rippled far beyond the courthouse walls. Within minutes, news alerts pinged on phones across the country. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from celebration to outrage. Cable news interrupted regular programming to cover what they were calling the trial of the decade. Inside the courtroom, the energy had completely transformed. What had been a one-sided prosecution now felt like something else entirely, a battleground where power and truth would collide in ways no one had anticipated. Judge Abrams called for order repeatedly as the gallery buzzed with conversation. Victoria Sterling sat frozen in her seat, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking. Her lawyer, Gregory Walsh, leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear, but she seemed unable to respond. Olivia stared at Andre with something between awe and terror. Daniel had gone pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the courtroom. Evelyn sat at the defense table, torn between pride in her grandson and fear for what his involvement might cost him. She watched him standing there, tall and unwavering, and remembered the boy she'd raised, the child she'd worked 3 jobs to feed, whose homework she'd checked by lamplight after 18-hour shifts, whose college application essays she'd typed on the Sterling family's computer late at night, when everyone was asleep. Your Honor, Gregory Walsh finally found his voice, standing with manufactured authority. The prosecution respectfully submits that Attorney General Carter's involvement represents a fundamental conflict of interest. His personal relationship with the defendant compromises his ability to participate objectively in these proceedings. We move for his immediate removal from this courtroom. Andre turned to face Walsh directly, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp as knives. "Mr. Walsh, I'm not here as a prosecutor or as defense counsel. I'm here as a citizen presenting evidence that was either overlooked or deliberately ignored. Evidence that points to the truth, which is something I thought we were all interested in finding." "The truth has been presented," Walsh countered. "We have evidence, testimony, and a clear timeline that—" "You have a velvet pouch with no fingerprints," Andre interrupted smoothly. "You have inconsistent testimony from a witness who couldn't remember what day the crime occurred. You have access logs that conveniently ignore when other family members were present. If that's your definition of truth, then this court needs to raise its standards." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gallery. Judge Abrams raised his hand for silence. "Attorney General Carter, I've already ruled that you may participate in a limited advisory capacity. That means you can present evidence, but you cannot act as primary counsel for the defense. Do you accept those terms?" "I do, Your Honor." "Then we'll proceed. But I warn everyone in this courtroom, I will not tolerate theatrics, grandstanding, or manipulation of these proceedings. We are here to find the truth, wherever it leads. Is that understood?" A chorus of agreements followed. Judge Abrams nodded. "Good. We'll recess for 1 hour while I review Attorney General Carter's credentials and any preliminary evidence he wishes to present. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted once more. Reporters rushed for the exits, desperate to file their stories. Spectators crowded the aisles, everyone trying to get a better look at Andre. Security moved in to manage the chaos. Andre made his way to Evelyn, who stood on shaking legs. He took her hands gently. "You shouldn't have done this," she whispered, though her eyes shone with gratitude. "I had to," he replied simply. "And Grandma, we're going to win this. I promise you." Sarah, Evelyn's public defender, approached nervously. "Attorney General Carter, I don't know how to. I'm grateful for your help, but I'm not sure how we coordinate." "Call me Andre, please. And we coordinate by focusing on the truth. I have evidence that will change everything, but we need to present it strategically. Can you trust me?" Sarah nodded, relief flooding her features. For the first time since taking this case, she didn't feel like she was drowning alone. In the hallway outside, Victoria finally found her voice. She cornered Walsh near the elevators, her words coming out in sharp, angry bursts. "How did you not know? How did you not discover that the housekeeper's grandson is the Attorney General of this state?" Walsh's face was red. "Mrs. Sterling, there was nothing in the initial background check that—" "Nothing? You're telling me that the most powerful law enforcement official in the state has a grandmother working as a housekeeper, and no one thought that was worth mentioning?" "Evelyn Carter's last name is different from his. She never mentioned him. The connection wasn't obvious." "Well, it's obvious now," Victoria hissed. "And it makes us look like we're persecuting his family. Do you understand what this does to our reputation?" "To the case. Mrs. Sterling, the evidence still supports. The evidence is circumstantial at best, and you know it. We're about to be destroyed in the court of public opinion." She pressed her fingers to her temples. "Fix this. I don't care how." Meanwhile, Olivia had pulled Daniel into a stairwell, away from cameras and curious ears. "This is over," she said flatly. "We can't win this anymore. The Attorney General is involved. Do you understand what that means?" Daniel leaned against the wall, his breathing shallow. "It means we're finished. You're finished. I'm not going down with you." Olivia's voice cracked. "Daniel, if you have any decency left, you'll confess. You'll tell the truth before he exposes it and makes everything worse." "I can't. You have to, because if you don't, I will." She grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "I suspected you from the beginning. I stayed silent to protect the family, but I can't anymore. Evelyn doesn't deserve this. She raised us, Daniel. She braided my hair when I was scared before school. She sat with you when you had nightmares. How can you let her take the fall for your mistakes? Daniel's face crumpled. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I was just going to borrow them, pay off what I owed, and put them back before anyone noticed. But then the storm happened, and everything went wrong, and I panicked. You framed an innocent woman, Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. You let our mother accuse someone who's been nothing but loyal to us for 43 years. That's not panic, Daniel. That's cowardice. She left him there, alone in the stairwell, his head in his hands. When court resumed, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Judge Abrams took his seat and surveyed the room with stern authority. I've reviewed Attorney General Carter's preliminary evidence and credentials. I'm satisfied that his involvement, while unusual, does not compromise the integrity of these proceedings. In fact, given the new information presented, I believe his participation may be necessary to ensure justice is properly served. Gregory Walsh stood. Your Honor, the prosecution maintains that. Mr. Walsh, I've made my ruling. Attorney General Carter may proceed. Andre approached the bench, carrying a folder of documents. Your Honor, I'd like to call Ruth Bennett to the stand. Ruth entered from the witness waiting room, her hands clasped tightly together. She'd changed from her maid's uniform into a simple dress, and her hair was pulled back neatly. As she walked to the stand, she kept her eyes on Evelyn, drawing strength from the woman who'd shown her kindness when no one else had. After being sworn in, Ruth sat down. Andre approached her with gentle authority. Ms. Bennett, how long have you worked for the Sterling family? 6 months, Ruth said softly. And during that time, did you have much interaction with Ms. Evelyn Carter? Yes. She trained me, helped me when I made mistakes, protected me when I was scared of getting fired. Can you tell the court what you overheard on the night before the jewelry was reported missing? Ruth took a deep breath. I was cleaning near Mr. Daniel Sterling's study. The door was cracked, and I heard him on the phone. He was upset, talking about owing money. He said something like, I'll have it by Friday, and it wasn't supposed to go this far. The courtroom went silent. Daniel shifted in his seat, his face ashen. Did you hear anything else? He mentioned the jewelry. He said something about putting it back, but that he needed more time. And did you report this to anyone at the time? Ruth's voice dropped to almost a whisper. No, I was scared. I'm just a maid. Who would believe me over him? Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Andre returned to his seat, and Gregory Walsh stood for cross-examination. Ms. Bennett, isn't it true that you could have misheard this conversation? That you might have taken innocent words out of context? No, sir. I know what I heard. And isn't it convenient that you're only coming forward now, after Attorney General Carter appeared? Almost as if you're trying to help your friend by inventing a story. Ruth's voice strengthened. I'm not inventing anything. I came forward because Ms. Evelyn doesn't deserve to be punished for something she didn't do. I should have spoken up earlier. I was wrong to stay silent. Walsh pressed her for several more minutes, but Ruth held firm. By the time she stepped down, several jurors were watching Daniel Sterling with open suspicion. During the next recess, Andre found Detective Harris waiting for him in the hallway. Attorney General, I've been going through the security footage again. You were right, there are gaps. Someone disabled the motion sensors near the sitting room for approximately 30 minutes during the storm. Can you determine who? The system requires a code to disable. Only 3 people have that code. Mrs. Sterling, Olivia Sterling, and Daniel Sterling. Andre nodded slowly. Thank you, Detective. Will you testify to this? Harris hesitated only a moment. Yes, the truth matters more than politics. That evening, as the courthouse emptied, Evelyn returned to her small apartment exhausted, but with a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. There was a knock on her door, and when she opened it, she found Olivia standing there, tears streaming down her face. Miss Evelyn, can I come in? Evelyn stepped aside silently, and Olivia entered, looking around at the modest space with shame written across her features. I suspected Daniel from the beginning, Olivia said without preamble. I knew he was desperate for money. I knew he'd been asking questions about the security system. But I didn't say anything because I didn't want to destroy what was left of our family. Evelyn listened without speaking, her expression unreadable. We grew up with your hands braiding our hair. Olivia continued, her voice breaking. You taught us to tie our shoes, to say our prayers, to be kind to others. You were there for every scraped knee, every bad dream, every moment our mother was too busy with her society friends to notice we existed. How do we ever doubt you? Because power makes people forget humanity, Evelyn said quietly. Because when you're used to being believed without question, you forget that belief should be earned. Olivia wiped her eyes. I'm going to make this right. I'm going to testify about what I know, about what I suspect. I don't care what it costs me. Evelyn reached out and gently wiped a tear from Olivia's cheek, the same way she'd done when Olivia was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. Love without courage is just decoration, baby, she said softly. I'm glad you're finding your courage, even if it came late. The morning sun cast long shadows through the courtroom windows as the trial entered what everyone sensed would be its final days. The gallery was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the aisles despite the bailiff's protests. News vans crowded every available space outside, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical flowers. Andre arrived early, his briefcase heavy with evidence that would finally expose the truth. He'd spent the entire night with Detective Harris, going through security footage frame by frame, analyzing timestamps, and building an ironclad timeline of Daniel Sterling's movements on the night of the theft. When court convened, Judge Abrams looked grave. Before we continue with testimony, I want to remind everyone that this courtroom exists to serve justice, not spectacle. Whatever comes out today, I expect dignity and respect for the process. Is that clear? A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Understood. Your Honor, I'd like to call Olivia Sterling to the stand. The gallery erupted in whispers. Victoria's head snapped toward her daughter, shock and betrayal warring on her face. Olivia walked to the stand with trembling hands but straight shoulders, looking directly at her mother as she was sworn in. Ms. Sterling, Andre began gently, what is your relationship to the defendant? Evelyn Carter has worked for my family since before I was born. She helped raise me. She was more present in my childhood than my own mother in many ways. Victoria's face went white, but she remained silent. And do you believe Miss Carter stole your family's jewelry? Olivia took a shaky breath. No, I don't. I never did. The courtroom exploded. Judge Abrams banged his gavel repeatedly. Order. I will have order. When the noise subsided, Andre continued. If you didn't believe Miss Carter was guilty, why didn't you say so earlier? Because I was afraid. Afraid of what the truth would mean for my family, for our reputation. Afraid of what would happen if I accused my own brother. Your brother, Andre repeated. Daniel Sterling. What do you know about his involvement in this theft? Gregory Walsh jumped to his feet. Objection. The witness is speculating about. I'm not speculating, Olivia said loudly, turning to face the judge directly. I know my brother took the jewelry. I've known since the beginning. The courtroom went silent. Even Walsh sat down slowly, recognizing he'd lost control of the narrative entirely. How do you know this? Andre asked. Because Daniel has a gambling addiction. He's been in debt for years, borrowing from dangerous people. 3 weeks before the theft, he asked me for $200,000. I refused. A week later, he asked about the security codes for the sitting room, claiming he wanted to photograph the jewelry for an appraisal. The timing was too convenient. Did you share your suspicions with anyone? No, I stayed silent. I even helped build a case against Evelyn by creating access logs that emphasized her presence while downplaying Daniel's. I manipulated evidence to protect my brother. Tears streamed down her face. I betrayed someone who loved me, who raised me, to protect someone who was guilty. I will never forgive myself for that. Andre let her words settle before continuing. Miss Sterling, why are you coming forward now? Because silence has cost more lives than lies ever will, she said, echoing words Andre had once told her. And because Evelyn deserves better. She always deserved better than what we gave her. On cross-examination, Walsh tried to discredit her testimony as emotional conjecture, but Olivia held firm. She provided dates, times, and specific conversations that painted an undeniable picture of Daniel's guilt. When she stepped down, she didn't return to sit with her family. Instead, She took a seat in the back row, as far from Victoria as possible. Andre's next piece of evidence was devastating. He presented Detective Harris's findings about the security system, the 30-minute gap in motion sensors, the access code required to disable them, and the fact that Daniel Sterling's code had been used at exactly the time the sensors went offline. Detective Harris, Andre asked, in your professional opinion, does this evidence suggest that Daniel Sterling had both means and opportunity to commit this theft? Yes, Harris said firmly. The evidence strongly suggests Mr. Sterling disabled the security system, accessed his mother's sitting room during the storm when everyone was distracted, and took the jewelry himself. The prosecution tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, but the pieces were falling into place too neatly to ignore. During lunch recess, Victoria confronted Evelyn in the hallway. Security moved to intervene, but Evelyn held up her hand. "Let her speak," she said quietly. Victoria stood before her, stripped of all pretense, looking smaller somehow than she had at the trial's beginning. "You raised my children better than I did," Victoria whispered. Evelyn met her eyes steadily. "Then let them learn from you now. Show them what accountability looks like. Show them that even the powerful have to face truth eventually." "I don't know how," Victoria admitted. "You start by telling the truth," Evelyn said, "even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." That afternoon, Andre presented his final piece of evidence, pawn shop record from 3 months before the theft. Detective Harris had tracked down a ledger showing that Daniel Sterling had pawned several small items, a watch, cufflinks, and a ring. All had belonged to his late father. These weren't family heirlooms worth millions, Andre explained to the jury, but they were items with sentimental value that Mr. Sterling was willing to sell. This establishes a pattern of behavior, selling family possessions to cover gambling debts. Then came the most damning evidence of all. A pawn shop employee testified that Daniel had asked about selling jewelry similar to the stolen pieces, inquiring about how much they might fetch and whether such sales could be done discreetly. "Did Mr. Sterling actually sell any jewelry to you?" Andre asked. "No, sir. He just asked questions. But he seemed very interested in the process, kept asking about whether we reported sales to any authorities." By the time testimony ended for the day, the case against Evelyn had effectively collapsed. The evidence now pointed unmistakably toward Daniel, and even the prosecution seemed to recognize they were fighting a losing battle. That night, Daniel sat alone in his childhood bedroom of the Sterling estate, surrounded by toys and trophies from a privileged youth he'd never appreciated. He pulled out his phone and stared at it for long minutes before finally making a call. "I'm done," he said when someone answered. "I can't do this anymore. You owe us money, Daniel. That doesn't just go away." "I know, but I'm going to tell the truth tomorrow. I'm going to confess to everything. If you do that, you'll go to prison. I know that too." His voice cracked. "But I can't let an innocent woman suffer for my mistakes anymore. I can't live with it." He hung up and sat in the darkness, clutching an old stuffed bear Evelyn had once mended for him when he was 6 years old. She'd stayed up late stitching its torn seam, then left it on his bed with a note. "Even broken things can be fixed with care." He'd forgotten that kindness. He'd forgotten so many kindnesses. The next morning, before court could officially begin, Daniel Sterling stood and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, I need to say something. Before we go any further, I need to tell the truth." The courtroom fell silent. Every camera focused on him. Judge Abrams leaned forward. "Mr. Sterling, are you sure you want to speak without consulting an attorney?" "I don't need an attorney to tell the truth," Daniel said, his voice shaking but clear. "I took the jewelry, not Evelyn." "Me?" Victoria gasped. Olivia closed her eyes. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. "I was desperate," Daniel continued. "I owed money to people who don't take no for an answer. I thought I could borrow the jewelry, sell it or pawn it temporarily, pay off my debts, and buy everything back before anyone noticed. But then the insurance appraisal was scheduled, and I panicked. I planted the velvet pouch in Evelyn's cart. I lied about seeing her by the sitting room. I let an innocent woman be accused because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done." He turned to face Evelyn directly. You raised me better than this. You taught me right from wrong. You were there for every important moment of my childhood, and this is how I repaid you. I'm sorry. I know those words aren't enough, but I'm so sorry. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She simply nodded once, acknowledging his words without absolving him. Judge Abrams spoke carefully. Mr. Sterling, I'm going to advise you to consult with an attorney before making any further statements. What you've just said amounts to a confession. I know, Your Honor, and I'm ready to face whatever consequences come from it. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed to file updates. The jury sat stunned. Gregory Walsh looked like he wanted to disappear, and Victoria Sterling sat frozen, watching her son's public confession with a blank expression of someone whose world had just completely shattered. Understood slowly. Your Honor, given Mr. Sterling's confession, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Evelyn Carter. So ordered, Judge Abrams said. Ms. Carter, you're free to go. All charges are dismissed with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled. On behalf of this court, I apologize for the injustice you've suffered. Evelyn rose on shaking legs. Sarah hugged her, crying openly. Ruth ran forward from the gallery, embracing her tightly. And Andre simply stood beside his grandmother, his hand on her shoulder, his expression a mixture of relief and barely contained anger at what she'd been put through. Security moved to escort Daniel Sterling from the courtroom, but before they reached him, he looked back one more time at Evelyn. I never meant to hurt you, he whispered. Evelyn's response was quiet but carried through the silent courtroom. Then you should have thought about that before you let fear make your choices for you. As Daniel was led away, Victoria finally moved. She stood, swaying slightly, and looked at Evelyn across the room. Their eyes met, 43 years of history passing between them in a single glance. Then Victoria turned and walked out, her empire crumbling around her with every step. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed. Andre stood at the microphone with Evelyn beside him, Ruth on her other side, and Sarah standing just behind them. Justice, Andre said clearly, requires courage. It requires us to stand up for truth, even when it's inconvenient, even when it threatens our comfort or reputation. My grandmother, Evelyn Carter, spent 43 years serving a family with dignity and integrity. When she was falsely accused, the system that should have protected her nearly destroyed her instead. That cannot happen again. We must do better. Reporters shouted questions, but Andre raised his hand. My grandmother would like to say something. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of everything she'd endured. I don't speak from bitterness, she began. I speak from hope. Hope that what happened to me will make people pause before rushing to judgment. Hope that we'll remember that every person, regardless of their station in life, deserves dignity and fairness. And hope that, even after injustice, redemption is possible for those brave enough to seek it. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. May we never mistake silence for strength again. The words echoed across every news outlet, every social media platform, every dinner table conversation in the country. Evelyn Carter, the wrongly accused housekeeper, had become a symbol of resilience, dignity, and the power of truth. But for Evelyn herself, standing in the sunlight outside that courthouse, the most important thing was simpler. She was free, and beside her stood the grandson she'd sacrificed everything to raise. Now a man who'd used his position not for personal gain, but to ensure justice was served. The fight wasn't over. There would be more hearings, more consequences, more healing to do. But the hardest battle had been won. The days following Daniel Sterling's confession were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and emotional aftermath. The courtroom confession had gone viral within hours, replayed on every news channel, and dissected by legal analysts across the country. But while public opinion had shifted decisively in Evelyn's favor, the machinery of justice moved with frustrating slowness. Andre spent those days in his office, working late into the nights. He compiled every photograph from the gala and trial, and now he sat at his desk with them spread across the surface like pieces of a puzzle. In the background of one press photo, taken during the gala preparations. There was a security mirror mounted on the wall. Andre enlarged the image on his computer screen, enhancing the reflection frame by frame. And there it was, clear as day. Daniel Sterling's silhouette reaching into the jewelry case. The timestamp on the photograph matched exactly when the motion sensors had been disabled. The mirror had captured what security cameras had missed. Andre leaned back in his chair, a grim satisfaction settling over him. This wasn't just confession anymore. This was proof. He forwarded the images to Detective Harris with a simple message: physical evidence to corroborate confession. Chain of custody is clean. Harris called him back within minutes. This is exactly what we need. I'm reopening the investigation formally with this evidence. It ties everything together: the timeline, the opportunity, the physical act itself. Good, Andre said. Because a confession can be recanted. Evidence can't. The next morning, Harris arrived at the Sterling estate with a warrant. The house that had once seemed impenetrable now felt exposed, vulnerable. Officers searched Daniel's room and found hidden bank statements showing payments to offshore accounts, communications with loan sharks, and receipts from pawn shops scattered across 3 states. Victoria watched from the doorway of her bedroom, her face ashen. The empire she'd built on appearances was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. In a downtown courthouse, Judge Abrams convened an emergency hearing. The gallery was packed once again, but the atmosphere had changed. Where there had been spectacle before, now there was gravity, a sense that real consequences were finally arriving. Daniel stood before the judge, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes red from sleepless nights. His attorney, a public defender assigned after his private lawyers quietly withdrew, stood beside him looking overwhelmed. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Abrams said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "you've confessed to grand theft, evidence tampering, and filing a false police report. You've also admitted to framing an innocent woman. How do you plead to these charges?" "Guilty, Your Honor," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "To all of it." The judge nodded slowly. "Before I proceed with sentencing, I want to hear from the victim. Ms. Carter, do you wish to address the court?" Evelyn stood from her seat in the gallery. She'd thought about this moment for days, wondering what she would say when given the chance. She walked to the front of the courtroom, and every eye followed her. "Your Honor, I don't speak from a place of revenge," she began, her voice steady. "Daniel Sterling was a boy when I first held him. I watched him grow, made his lunches, bandaged his scraped knees. I saw the good in him once. But somewhere along the way, he forgot that actions have consequences, that other people's lives matter as much as his own comfort." She turned to face Daniel directly. "What you did to me wasn't just theft of my freedom. It was theft of my dignity, my reputation, my peace. You let me stand accused knowing I was innocent. That's a betrayal that cuts deeper than any stolen jewelry." Daniel's shoulders shook with silent sobs. But Evelyn continued, "I also believe in redemption. I believe people can learn from their mistakes if they're willing to do the hard work of change. So I ask this court not for maximum punishment, but for meaningful accountability. Let him face consequences that teach rather than just punish." She returned to her seat, and the courtroom remained silent for a long moment. Judge Abrams cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter's grace is remarkable. However, this court must balance mercy with justice. Mr. Sterling, you will serve 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. During your probation, you will complete 2,000 hours of community service, focusing on financial literacy programs for at-risk youth. You will also attend mandatory counseling for gambling addiction." Daniel nodded, accepting the sentence without protest. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "you will make full restitution to Ms. Carter for her legal fees, lost wages, and emotional damages. The amount will be determined by a separate civil proceeding." Victoria made a strangled sound from the gallery. The financial implications were just beginning to sink in. "Court is adjourned," Judge Abrams said, his gavel coming down with finality. As officers led Daniel away, he looked back at Evelyn one last time. She met his eyes with neither anger nor forgiveness, just a quiet sadness for the man he could have been. Outside the courthouse, Olivia waited nervously. She'd been subpoenaed to testify in a separate investigation into her role in manipulating evidence. Her career in business was already over. Major retailers had dropped her skincare line, investors had pulled funding, and her social media following had collapsed overnight. She approached Andre as he exited the building. "Attorney General Carter, can I speak with you?" Andre studied her carefully. "What do you want, Miss Sterling?" "I want to make things right. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to try." She pulled out a folder. "I'm launching a scholarship fund in Evelyn's name. It will provide full tuition and living expenses for children of domestic workers who want to pursue higher education. I've committed $5 million as the initial endowment." Andre took the folder, flipping through the legal documents. It was legitimate, comprehensive, and substantial. "This doesn't erase what you did," he said quietly. "I know, but it's a start, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the person Evelyn believed I could be when she was raising me." Andre nodded slowly. "Then I suggest you start by calling her yourself. Don't use me as a messenger." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "Do you think she'll even talk to me?" "Only one way to find out." That evening, Evelyn returned to her small apartment above what used to be her garage quarters at the Sterling estate. She'd been offered the space rent-free by Victoria as part of an initial settlement offer, but Evelyn knew she wouldn't stay there much longer. Too many memories haunted these walls, both beautiful and painful. There was a knock at her door. When she opened it, Victoria Sterling stood there, looking older, somehow diminished. "May I come in?" Victoria asked. Evelyn stepped aside without speaking. Victoria entered, looking around at the modest furniture, the religious paintings on the walls, the photographs of Andre at various stages of his life. "I came to apologize," Victoria said. "Not for my son, his apologies are his own to make, but for myself. For 43 years, you gave everything to my family. You raised my children with more patience and love than I ever showed them. You held our secrets, protected our reputation, and asked for nothing but basic respect in return. And when you were accused, I didn't even question it. I believed it immediately because it was easier than facing the possibility that my own son could be guilty." She sat down heavily in a chair. "I've spent my entire life building a reputation, cultivating an image of perfection. And in one night, it all came apart. But you know what the worst part is? I don't even know who I am without that image. I don't know how to be a person instead of a performance." Evelyn sat across from her. "Then you have work to do. Real work. Not the kind that comes with applause and admiration, but the kind that happens in silence when no one's watching. I don't know how to start. You start by being honest. With yourself first, then with others." Evelyn's voice was firm but not unkind. "You start by recognizing that your son didn't become who he is in a vacuum. He learned from watching you that image matters more than integrity. That's a hard truth, but it's necessary." Victoria's face crumpled. "I've destroyed my family." "No," Evelyn said, "but you've got a chance now to help them rebuild. The question is whether you'll take it." After Victoria left, Evelyn sat in the quiet apartment and felt the weight of the past weeks finally beginning to lift. Her phone buzzed with a text from Andre. "Dinner tomorrow? Just the two of us." She smiled and replied, "I'd love that, baby." 3 months had passed since the trial's conclusion, and the world had moved on to new scandals and stories. But for those whose lives had been forever changed by the Sterling case, the work of rebuilding was just beginning. The formal exoneration hearing was held on a crisp autumn morning. Judge Abrams presided over a courtroom far less crowded than before, filled now with people who genuinely cared rather than those seeking entertainment. "Ms. Evelyn Carter," the judge began, "this court formally acknowledges that you were wrongly accused and maliciously prosecuted due to bias, fear, and the corruption of truth. Your name is fully cleared, your record expunged. Furthermore, this court recognizes the injustice you suffered and the grace with which you bore it." He paused, looking at her with genuine respect. "You have taught us all something about dignity." "Thank you." Evelyn stood and nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Beside her, Andre squeezed her hand. After the hearing, there were apologies to be given and received. Olivia approached Evelyn in the hallway, her hand shaking. Miss Evelyn, I know I've already apologized, but I wanted to tell you in person. The scholarship fund is active. We awarded our first scholarships last month. 25 students, all children of domestic workers, will have their college education fully funded. Evelyn studied Olivia's face, seeing genuine remorse there. That's good work, Olivia. Keep doing it. Not for forgiveness, but because it's right. I will. I promise. Olivia hesitated. Can I ask you something? Anything. How do you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it? Evelyn smiled sadly. Forgiveness isn't about what people deserve. It's about refusing to let their actions poison your own heart. I'm working on forgiving you and your family, but that work takes time. Be patient. Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for even being willing to try. Victoria had extended an official offer to Evelyn through her lawyers. Full reinstatement as head housekeeper with triple her previous salary, a formal written apology, and a substantial settlement for damages. The offer sat on Evelyn's kitchen table for days before she finally responded. She declined. Instead, she accepted a position running a community kitchen in the neighborhood where she'd grown up. The space was small but filled with light, and every day, Evelyn arrived early to prepare meals for people who needed them. Homeless individuals, struggling families, elderly folks on fixed incomes. On opening day, Ruth arrived wearing a crisp new uniform. Andre had quietly arranged for her to receive training in hospitality management, and she'd been offered a position as head housekeeper at a prestigious hotel. But before starting her new job, she wanted to help Evelyn launch the community kitchen. Miss Evelyn, where do you want me to start? Ruth asked. Right here beside me, baby, Evelyn said, handing her a cutting board. Just like always. They worked in comfortable silence. The old gospel hymn Evelyn had hummed in the Sterling mansion, now filling the community kitchen with warmth. Daniel Sterling was serving his sentence at a minimum security facility, where he worked in the prison library and attended daily counseling sessions. He wrote letters to Evelyn weekly, long, rambling attempts to explain himself, to apologize, to understand how he'd fallen so far. She read each one, but didn't respond. That would come later, if it came at all. Victoria visited him once a month, and those visits were stilted, painful affairs. But slowly, carefully, they were learning to talk to each other honestly for the first time in their lives. One afternoon, Victoria appeared at Evelyn's community kitchen. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a sweater, and looked nervous. I was wondering, Victoria said hesitantly, if you could use a volunteer. I don't know how to cook or run a kitchen, but I can learn. I want to learn. Evelyn studied her for a long moment. The woman standing before her was different from the one who'd pointed an accusing finger months ago. Humbled, uncertain, but genuinely trying. We serve lunch at noon, Evelyn said finally. If you're serious about helping, be here at 10 tomorrow morning. Victoria's face flooded with relief. I will. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Evelyn said with a slight smile. You're going to be peeling potatoes. Victoria laughed, a real laugh, not the practiced tinkle she perfected for society gatherings. I suppose I deserve that. You do, but everyone deserves a chance to do better. True to her word, Victoria arrived the next morning at 9:45. She worked beside Evelyn chopping vegetables, washing dishes, and serving meals to people who didn't know or care about her former status. And for the first time in decades, Victoria Sterling felt like she was doing something that mattered. Andre visited the community kitchen regularly, often arriving with groceries or supplies purchased with his own money. He'd sit at the worn counter and watch his grandmother move through the space with the same grace she'd shown in the Sterling mansion, but now with freedom and joy lighting her face. One Sunday afternoon, he found her sitting at a table near the window, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. What are you thinking about, Grandma? She smiled. I'm thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. You've left an incredible legacy, Andre said. You raised me, gave me every opportunity, taught me what integrity looks like. That's one legacy, she agreed. But there's another one too. For 43 years, I was silent when I should have spoken up. I accepted less than I deserved because I thought that was the price of security. I want my legacy to be different now. I want it to be about speaking truth, demanding dignity, and refusing to let anyone make me small. Andre reached across the table and took her hand. Then that's exactly what your legacy will be. That evening, the community kitchen hosted a special dinner. The space was decorated with simple flowers and candles. Evelyn had invited everyone who'd stood by her during the trial. Ruth, Detective Harris, Sarah, the public defender, Reverend Matthews, and a handful of others who'd offered support when she needed it most. Andre stood to offer a toast, raising his glass of sweet tea. To my grandmother, Evelyn Carter. She taught me that justice isn't about revenge or even about winning. It's about standing in truth even when truth costs you everything. It's about maintaining dignity when the world tries to strip it from you. And it's about believing that people can change, can grow, can become better than they were. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes shining. Grandma, I'm the Attorney General because you cleaned houses at 4 in the morning to pay for my textbooks. I understand justice because you showed me what it looks like to choose mercy over bitterness. Everything I am, I owe to you. Evelyn stood, her own glass raised. And everything I am, I owe to the people who stood beside me when the world was trying to tear me down. To Ruth, who was braver than she knew. To Detective Harris, who chose truth over politics. To Sarah, who fought for me even when the odds were impossible. And to my grandson, who reminded me that silence isn't strength. She paused, her voice growing stronger. May we never mistake silence for strength again. May we speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. And may we always choose truth over comfort. Glasses clinked together as voices echoed. To truth. The evening stretched on, filled with laughter and stories, with planning for the kitchen's future and dreams for all it could become. As darkness fell outside, the light from the kitchen windows spilled onto the street, warm and welcoming. Months later, Andre stood at a podium in the state capitol, signing a new piece of legislation into law. The Evelyn Carter Worker Protection Act established stronger safeguards against wrongful prosecution of domestic workers, mandatory investigation standards when accusations were made, and funding for legal representation for low-wage workers facing criminal charges. Evelyn sat in the front row, Ruth beside her, both wearing their Sunday best. When Andre finished signing, he handed the pen to his grandmother. "This is yours," he said simply. "None of this would exist without you." She took the pen, holding it like the precious thing it was, not the object itself, but what it represented. Change, progress, hope. That Sunday, Evelyn hosted dinner at her new home, a modest house she'd purchased with part of the settlement money. The table was crowded with faces. Andre and his girlfriend, Ruth and her sister, Reverend Matthews, Detective Harris and his wife, Sarah and her partner. And at the far end, looking slightly out of place but genuinely present, sat Olivia and Victoria Sterling. Before they ate, Evelyn raised her glass once more. To second chances, she said. To courage. To the long, hard work of becoming who we're meant to be. She looked around the table at this unlikely family she'd assembled, not through blood, but through trial, truth, and the choice to keep moving forward. And to remembering, she added softly, that every person at every table deserves dignity and respect, no matter who they are or where they've been. Amen, came the chorus of voices. As dinner began, conversation and laughter filled the room. Evelyn sat at the head of her own table, not as a servant, but as an honored matriarch. She thought of the girl she'd been decades ago, taking her first job as a housekeeper with hope and determination. She thought of the woman she'd become, weathered by injustice, but unbroken by it. And she thought of the future, of the scholarships bearing her name, of the legislation protecting workers like her, of the community kitchen feeding her neighbors, of the grandson who'd fought for her, and of the enemies who'd become, if not quite friends, then at least fellow travelers on the road to redemption. Outside, the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, painting the sky with the colors of a day well lived and a legacy earned not through silence, but through the courage to speak truth when truth mattered most. Evelyn smiled, picked up her fork, and began to eat, surrounded by love. The story of the wrongfully accused housekeeper had ended, but the story of Evelyn Carter, woman of dignity and grace, was just beginning its brightest chapter. When the powerful weaponize their privilege to destroy the innocent, how many Evelyns suffer in silence before someone finally stands up for them? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice, courage, and the truth that refuses to stay buried.